Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending where on the planet you are. I am delighted to invite you or to welcome you to today's webcast, which is titled Stop Funding Your Competitors, How to Deliver a Faster, Safer, and More Profitable Digital Experience. We're going to spend about the next hour with you today, walking you through real-world examples and actionable things that you can do to drive revenue from your online and digital experiences. My name is Dan Druker, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Instart Logic. I am joined today by Alan Harris, the VP of Sales for Blue Triangle. Alan, you want to say hi?
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for attending.
So we have a large number of folks on the call today, so I can see there's a ton of interest in this topic. And really, the way I think about this is that we all know as marketers that digital initiatives have to be fast, they have to be safe, they have to deliver excellent consumer experience. Here are examples of two of my customers that have done just an amazing job of building, compelling, interactive, very high performing digital properties. And really the focus today is on, what can you do? Why does it matter? How do you think about and measure? And with a whole bunch of best practices around, what can you do to drive more revenue, for your business? And what's going to happen today is that Alan and I are going to tag team this presentation. And so I'm going to start off with Alan, and he's going to talk a little bit about some personal experiences involved in conversion, and we'll go back and forth and try to be interactive. And we love your questions. So if you have questions for us, there's starting to already be some coming in. You can go ahead and you can type those things into the Q&A window within the webcast tool. So with that, Alan, you want to get started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. So a little personal story. So I'm a motorcycle guy. I own quite a few motorcycles, currently have 7, and I've had as many as 13. And this is my favorite bike. As you can see, I ride with my dog, and once a year we take a very long trip, and this year was no exception. So about a week before I left on my week-and-a-half trip, I got an email from the company that makes my motorcycle helmet. And they essentially said, hey, we're sorry to tell you this, but the helmet that you have is no longer considered safe to use, so you need to stop using it right away. I happened to be leaving on a business trip the next day and was coming back the day before I was leaving on my annual trip with my dog. And we were heading down south through California, and then we were going to come up through the Mojave Desert and Death Valley and a few other places. And unfortunately, I was on my way to the airport when this happened. Dan, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So where we were going is not only a very beautiful place, but if you click one more time, Dan, it's also a very dangerous place. That cliff on the left-hand side in the Mojave Desert is about 2,000 feet. So it was very important to me that I had a very safe helmet. And as we move ahead through the presentation, unfortunately, again, I live only 2 stops on the BART, the subway, from my home to the airport. So I had a very short time to actually go ahead and replace this. So what I did is I went to my favorite motorcycle site, brought up the product that I was interested in, and essentially I got a spinning wheel. And that was cruiser customizing. So I moved from that site very quickly to leatherup.com, my second favorite motorcycle store on the internet. And again, same thing, it just was not responding quickly enough. So finally I went to the third site, Bike Bandit, from whom I've never purchased anything before. And I was able to complete the purchase before I made it to the airport. Now, my $620 purchase for a helmet is probably not going to put cruiser customizing or Leather Up out of business. But imagine that this happens 100 times a day or 1,000 times a day. What occurred here was cruiser customizing and Leather Up, for whatever reason, provided me a poor experience from a performance perspective. And I ended up giving my money to a site that I had never purchased from before. This happens every day across every industry on the internet. So why are your customers possibly leaving and going to competitors? Because the bar is high for performance and the threshold is low. So let's talk about a few numbers that you probably have seen and a few that you haven't. So 79% of shoppers that are dissatisfied with a website say that they are less likely to buy from that site again. And a 1-second delay can be a result of 7% or more of a reduction in conversions. And website abandonment, there is a well-defined threshold. So if people wait over 3 seconds on their desktop or over 5 seconds on their mobile device, 80% of them will abandon that site. Here's a study that you probably haven't seen. 83% of users that will abandon a site due to performance will immediately click over to a competitive website if one is available. So for all of you folks out here that are listening, this is happening today. And customers are also making inferences about your company based on performance that, although make no sense, are incredibly impactful from a revenue perspective. So this was an interesting study that was done. They took 1,000 people. They gave them $25 to buy a product at a website. And they delayed the website either by 0, 2, or 5 seconds. And then they asked all the people in that study, tell me about some things about that company that you believe based upon your experience. So quality of product, trustworthiness of the company, and customer service were 3 questions where performance made a difference in how the user perceives the company, even though they had never interacted with those divisions or departments within the company that they purchased from. And what that means is if you have a slow site, you are considered less trustworthy than you would be if you were focusing more on performance. And this really matters. For organizations that optimize performance, they receive 27% more conversions and 19% more revenue per transaction. And that is very, very significant.
And Alan, just for me to jump in on this, my perspective is, as a marketer myself, we're under all this pressure to make sites richer and more complicated, which may result in more personalized, which slows things down. So can you talk about that? Just I know this is off your script a little bit, but how do those things interact? A highly personalized site that's slow versus a streamlined, fast. How do you think about that?
There's a lot of studies out there, and based upon the billions of measurements that Blue Triangle takes and monetizes, personalization makes a significant impact. And in some cases, it's over 30% for the websites that deploy it. However, personalization erodes performance. So in some cases, the more you personalize your site, make the experience better for your end user and reduce buyer friction, the performance delays introduced can have a negative impact on the performance, on the revenue that you're bringing in based upon that. So there's a very delicate balance, and helping our customers navigate through that is incredibly important in increasing revenue.
Fabulous.
So, back not even that long ago, people would go to a grocery store and the lines would be very long and they'd wait in line for a minute or two and then they'd just, boy, this isn't worth it. I can go shopping tomorrow, or maybe I just don't need this stuff. And, the time it takes for that to happen is a few minutes. In the digital world, the time it takes for that to happen is a few seconds or even a few milliseconds. So the performance of a website is infinitely more impactful than it used to be on buying. So users that get fast performance buy more than they would have had they shopped in a physical store, and users that get slow impact will abandon those websites much more quickly than they would in the past. So now performance is even more important than it was way back in the day, and even a year or two ago. As the years go on, and if you look at the Gartner reports and the KISS-Metrics reports, every year the threshold for abandonment comes down between 1/3 of a second and 1/2 a second. And what does that look like for your customers? So here you may have not seen data like this before, but what we're looking at is a histogram of several different pages for different types of customers. But what I really want you to pay attention to is the yellow line. This is the conversion rate or conversion percentage of customers that convert to revenue based upon performance. So if we look up top on this home page for the electronics retailer, when their site is fast, users convert at a 1.75% rate. However, when their site is slow, and slow in this case only means 6 to 7 seconds. They lose half of their customers due to performance. And if we look at the one in the middle, they lose half of their customers before 4 seconds. And I'm sure everyone on the line understands the impact of performance on conversions. But our next slide adds another component. And this is a component that's not always paid attention to, and that is revenue per transaction. So even though this homepage up top doesn't have the early sensitivity, they don't lose their customers until 7 seconds versus 4 on the one below, the average user spends 50% less money per transaction on their site when the transaction happens at 3 seconds. So they have got a very significant challenge. They're not losing a ton of customers early, but they're losing their revenue early. And this is the impact that performance is having on your site right now. So since we've been on the phone and based upon the attendees that I see, and there are some very big sites, I would imagine that this has happened dozens or maybe hundreds of times since we have been on the line. Your customers are coming to your sites and they're leaving, and in many cases, they're clicking to your competitors. So the rest of the presentation is going to talk about things that you can do today to impact that today.
Great. And so here's what we see. And the way I think about this is, okay, it's not so controversial, right? And what I like about what Alan and Blue Triangle have done is they're able to help you quantify exactly how does performance impact conversion, exactly how does performance impact revenue, for your particular company. And if I think about, what do you do about it? Well, here's the trap we're all in, is that in the olden days, all of 15 years ago, you had a single website and it was pretty straightforward and simple, and you were optimizing for a single kind of consumer that was coming in on their desktop on Microsoft Windows with Internet Explorer. And what's happened now is, as I engage with heads of e-commerce and CMOs and chief digital officers, I start to hear about my company doesn't have, one website or one application. I have 100 applications, and I have, cloud web and mobile applications, and I'm engaging with consumers in all kinds of places. And there's all of this pressure, as Alan mentioned earlier, to be more rich and more complex. Personalization works, but it slows things down, right? We talked about that. On the devices, on our network every day, we see more than 1,000 different classes of devices, much less, tens of thousands of different devices. And so, if you don't have, in the old days, you could just say, I'm going to optimize my one application on my website for one client, Microsoft Windows, Internet Explorer 5. Today, you can't hire enough programmers to do that, to make sure that every application is perfectly optimized for every single consumer, no matter what device they're using. And that's, of course, a huge challenge for us. Alan talked about the expectation for performance everywhere on the planet. It used to be not long ago, we all know that Wi-Fi on the airplane felt like a miracle. And now you get really mad when it's not fast and on the entire time, right? And that's exactly what's happening with consumers, particularly in mobile. Many millennials, if you show them an Ethernet cable, won't even know what it is, right? They've never seen that thing before. Other things that make this hard around mobile networks are that mobility simply wasn't designed. TCP/IP, the protocol, for those of you that are a little more technical, wasn't designed for fast performing applications. And so even that causes problems in a world where, for most of my clients, more than 60% of their traffic is now mobile, and how you make that fast is a big issue. And then, we won't talk so much today in this presentation about, but you have also big issues around security and, an area that will absolutely impact performance. There's bots. From an SEO perspective, right? You want to make sure that your site looks incredibly fast for Google, as their robots spider your site. As much as 15% of your SEO rankings are going to be driven by how fast your site perform from the perspective of Google's spider. But there are other kinds of traffic. I have many clients in the hotel and airline industry where you have malicious bots that are scraping prices and that are even, making phantom reservations to try to screw with inventory, to try to arbitrage prices. So there's, all kinds of crazy stuff that everybody needs to think about managing in a world where you have, armies of computers interacting with your website that aren't real people. And that's, for another, presentation. So this slide gets to the point that Alan was talking about, and this is an example from a real client that we worked with. And this data is showing you what is the same graph as Alan showed that comes out of Blue Triangle. What is the impact of performance and conversion, or what is the impact of conversion on performance? And what you want to see here is that, and the key insight in this slide is, you want to look at this not in aggregate, but in individual consumer cohorts. And so if you find yourself, as this company did, you see those 3 humps to the right that are circled in yellow, or circled in red and they're yellow. Those are groups of individual consumers that are having bad performance experiences. So when you think about conversion, all the stuff to the left of about 3 or 3.5 seconds for this company was converting pretty well, but they had substantial bubbles of consumers that were converting poorly. And the way I think about this is, if folks are already fast, averages are going to lie, and you don't really want to focus on people that are already having fast experiences. What this data shows is that by applying technology to understand these cohorts of consumers and to move the 3 slow cohorts on the right to the green circles on the left, this particular firm saw a 20% increase in conversion rates. And so that's some insight I want to make sure everybody thinks about, because it's not obvious, because we like to think in averages, and averages lie. So if you thought for this company that the average was 3.5 seconds, so they're okay, you would make the wrong conclusion. It's so important to focus on, where are your substantive cohorts of consumers that are experiencing slow performance, and by focusing on them, you really impact, conversion and revenue for your firm. So let me give you an example of that. And here this is running, and I'll run it again for you as well too. This is an example of, now I want to be very careful here. This is Alexander Wang's website, and I don't want to imply, I have many things in here that are from Instart Logic customers. This particular example is from a company that is not. And one of the things that we're able to do very quickly to show you kind of, what are the opportunities for easily speeding up performance is, I can actually take traffic from any website on the internet, and I can run it through Instart Logic's platform, and I can show you what is the potential impact on performance of running your current initiatives through our system without you doing anything at all. And in this case, you see a substantial performance improvement of about 39%. And why do I bring this up? Because by making this particular website 39% faster from the consumer's perspective, I want you to look at what the potential is for conversion improvements, right? And so this is an interesting idea where, if you think about these 2 companies that are joining together for this webcast today, Blue Triangle does amazing reporting and analytics of, what's revenue coming in, what's driving revenue, what's driving conversion, how's it all working? And you can see here, using their data, this is representative examples of what the impact might be, right? So a substantial increase, if you actually are able to make that site 39% faster, you would expect a much higher average order value, you'd expect much higher conversion rates. And Blue Triangle has really good data on this for every single vertical, with hundreds and hundreds of companies. And so a kind of cool thing you can do here is, you can actually try this stuff out before you buy anything, and you can go look at it and see, based on your current application, based on what both firms project improvements can be made, what's the impact to your bottom line going to be? And so you don't have to guess, right? And that's the important part here, kind of what data-driven performance analytics is all about. So how does that work? How are we able to achieve a 39% performance improvement? Well, what Instart Logic is doing in front of that application is, it's using artificial intelligence to learn what the application is trying to do, and it's learning consumer usage patterns, and it's learning about the devices consumers are using. And it's in effect behaving just like an army of programmers would behave if you could afford them, but nobody can. And it's applying a whole bunch of different performance enhancing techniques to these applications on the fly. So what is an example of that? It's learning the website, and it's learning what parts of the page are static and what parts of the page are dynamic and change. And it's automatically caching the things that are static, very close to the consumer. It looks at the content that your programmers have written. And one of the common mistakes we see programmers making is they include whole libraries of JavaScript in applications. It turns out that in the real world, very frequently 90% or more of those things aren't used at all by the consumer or by the application. So you're sending, 90% too much content, over the wire or through the air, which slows things down. It's even doing things like prediction. It's learning automatically customer journeys. If a consumer is on a particular page, what are the next pages they're most likely to go to? And it'll preload the next most common pages kind of silently in the background. So from the consumer's perspective, they look at one page, I'm deciding when I want to click on, and then the next page is immediately there. So there's about 30 different techniques that an AI-based system is applying automatically, and that's how we're achieving that, in the prior slide, 39% faster performance without having to adjust the code of that particular application at all. All this stuff kind of happens in the cloud and on the wire, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The important part is you don't have to change your applications at all. They just immediately start running faster. And the result of this is that the typical thing we see across hundreds of companies is, on average, for a well-designed website, 10 to 30% faster performance, which, as Alan has been talking about, directly leads to better consumer experience, higher average order value, higher conversion, and something people don't think about a lot, much better SEO results. So more people will come to you. Okay, Alan, we're going to talk about the next thing now that we've graduated from performance, or do you want to weigh in on that topic at all?
No, I think you covered it very well. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
So our next topic is user experience, and there's several components to that, and performance we have talked about. So faster websites with equal user experience, meaning aesthetics, will have a higher impact on revenue and conversions. But there's another component to this, and that is the user experience from an aesthetics perspective. And let me tell you a little story about a customer of ours from 4 or 5 months ago. Next slide, thank you. So we had a very large department store, traditionally brick and mortar, and had moved into the online space very well, and they were growing rapidly from an online revenue perspective. And they were absolutely firm believers that performance impacts revenue. So they began a project, and this was just about the time where we were figuring out as an industry that we can identify devices and we can identify bandwidth. And we can do active compression. So, hey, someone's on an iPhone, we're going to send them a smaller version of this picture. And this company decided to do that. They wanted to improve the performance of all their pages, and they internally wrote an algorithm that would look and see what devices and bandwidth they had, and they would compress the images accordingly. So they went down a project path, and it took them about 4 months to build all of this logic. And when they deployed it, it had a significant impact on performance. And in some cases, performance improved by 50%. Very significant. However, within a day of deploying this logic, not only did the site speed up, but revenue plummeted by 18%, almost 18%. And what it turned out, and we'll show you this on the next screen, is that the users with the fastest experience were converting at the lowest rate. So now we started to get people getting the website in 1 and 2 and 3 seconds. And unfortunately, these users were just not converting to revenue. And the company, this department store, came to us and said, well, this data, we're not so sure about it at this point. And we dug through and we found out what had occurred. And what had occurred was they were overly compressing images that were coming down to their users that were on some of the medium and slow connections. So what was happening, although the images were loading fast, they were loading in a way that made them not appealing. They were blurry, they had digital artifacts in it, etc. And that impacted revenue very significantly. We worked with this customer, and we figured out how to right-size the compression specifically for revenue and not performance, and that is a huge distinction. So in the past, as we looked at these types of things, we assumed that performance was everything. And IT organizations often go down the path of trying to improve performance to its maximum capabilities, and in many cases, it's the right thing to do. When it comes down to customer-facing applications that are trying to show things to make them appealing for the user to make a buying decision, that's the wrong approach. We need to figure out how much compression is right for the customer to be able to make a buying decision. And that's what we did here. So we, and if we continue to the next slide, we can show that the more time you spend making sure that the images that come down to your customers are optimized for revenue, you can increase revenue significantly. So as we move on, I want you to take this thought with you. Ask your analytics folks to provide you with two things. One is a conversion rate curve based upon performance, and they can likely go into their analytics to find that. And the second is to take a look at your users that are getting the fastest response time and make sure that you're not seeing a dip in conversions for those users.
Fabulous. And so, you know, by now you can tell the roles of us in the on the call today are Alan is really talking about the problem, and I'm going to help you think about some solutions. And you know, some of this is available. Certainly, the things I'll talk about are things that Instart Logic does, but you know, we're not the only game in town for all of this. So, really, you want to think about these are problems that are very much solvable today, and there's plenty of solutions to go do this. You know, we think we have a good one, but there's others as well too. I want to be careful not to overly sell. And so if you have that issue that Alan described, right, and really any online retailer will, the way I think about it from the CMO's perspective is that I spend a lot of money on creative. I spend a lot of money, if I'm a product company, I spend a lot of money on beautiful photography. If I'm a reseller of other companies, you know, products, I spend a lot of time making sure I acquire high quality images, you know, from my suppliers. And the mistake you don't want to make, as Alan is describing, is just applying compression as a blunt force instrument. And if you overdo it, you know, you have this too blurry, pixelated, looks ugly problem, right? And boy, we have so many fashion brands as clients, and it hurts me to think about. They spend all this money on making gorgeous products and taking a beautiful, you know, photography, and then, you know, we go in and use JPEG as a blunt instrument and just over compress and stuff looks like crap, and then people don't want to buy it, right? It's pretty simple to understand. So how can you solve this problem? Well, one way is you can have an army of folks on your graphics team, and believe it or not, some companies have actually done this. And you know, you can go individually look at every single image, and you often have to have these things, right? You have to cut them in many different sizes, and you can kind of individually figure out, you know, what compression algorithm and what settings to do manually, you know, to achieve a balance of, you know, a reasonable size at still really good quality. And what I would tell you is all of our research shows that quality really matters. For almost any kind of firm, you want to have things look beautiful. And you know this as a consumer, that if things look good, you're more likely to purchase it. The key is, how do you apply the appropriate compression algorithm with the appropriate settings based not just on the image, but also based on the capabilities of the device that the consumer's using, right? And so this turns out to be an area where artificial intelligence works really well. And an application of AI here is using computer vision first to understand what kind of image is it. Is this a product hero, as I have here, or is it a background shot, or is it a happy shopper? You know, there are dozens and dozens of different themes of kinds of images. And once you identify that, then you can marry that with what's the device the consumer is using, and what is the capabilities, the display capabilities of that device. You know, my brand new Samsung Galaxy S8 has this ultra high fidelity, amazing screen. I can see much more stuff on that than if my children can on their old iPhone 5s. And so thinking about delivering the right amount of image content, you know, for the kind of device that you have. And then you might even think about the network, right? What are the capabilities of the connection the consumer is coming to you on? And now think of an AI-based system that can automatically, you know, generate the right image and using the exactly right compression format in exactly right settings for the particular device the consumer is using. And that has two benefits when you do that. It means that you get, you know, optimal image quality at the smallest possible size. It also means you have a huge cost reduction in your design and development department and your imagery department, because you only need to maintain a single high quality image on your servers. You don't need to maintain thousands of versions that you cut manually. You just let an AI-based system do this for you. And what we see in the real world is that if you start with a raw image, you can see 60 to 90% compression from the original with no impact on visual quality. And if you have a kind of manually optimized image, you can even see on average a 20% improvement in size or decrease in size of image with no impact on visual quality. And let me give you again some examples of those that are just things I selected across the internet. So here are images that are currently live on Visa's website. And if you take the original that they already have there and you apply AI-based compression, you can reduce it by about 30% with no impact at all on the visuals. And you can imagine that's a substantial increase. If you have somebody with a slow internet connection, that's going to make a major difference in when you have many of these images on a page, how fast the page loads. Here's an example of Tommy Hilfiger taking 2 megabytes off, the images on their homepage, again, with no impact on visual quality, just by using, smart AI-driven image compression. And here's the biggest one that I found so far, which is General Electric, right? Going from almost half a megabyte image to 108K with, again, no impact on visual quality, just by having smart software that understands the right things to do and making it a not manual process. So, if I could give you one tip here around images, it's we see that many folks have already figured out that compression matters. I do see that there's some places on the web where you still have, very unnecessarily large images, and folks haven't even tried to do anything at all to make them perform better. So, as Alan said, there's a balance here of, visual quality and performance, but what I see when I look at the web is some people have major opportunities here. Alan, do you want to jump in and comment on this at all before I move to the next section?
Yeah, absolutely. So performance and usability are almost two sides of a coin. In general, as you create more usability and personalization on your site, it's going to slow things down. This is how you combat that. So the personalization that occurs in the back end is often computing intensive, and it slows down some of the responses on the back end or from the origin. This will negate that challenge. You'll get the same user experience regardless of the device that you're on without impacting performance. And that's really the hope of omnichannel, that everyone gets the same experience. And this way, your brand comes through well, and it's not impacted negatively by a user experience that you can absolutely control.
Absolutely right. And I really like Alan's point about, don't optimize images just for size, optimize them for revenue. I think that's a very smart insight. I want to give you another couple things you could just go home and do right now, though, for all of you online. So one of the things I'd like all of you to do is, if you, and most companies have not done this already, so go on the internet and install a plugin in your web browser called Ghostery, and you see what it looks like here on the right. And what Ghostery will do is will tell you how many cloud services that you have that you're calling out to on your website. And so what are those things? That might be, typically these things are advertising trackers, they are analytics capabilities, it's personalization capabilities. There's 5 or 6 categories of cloud services that we see most websites calling out to. And it's really common. Marketing people just want this stuff, right? You want to have more analytics and you want to have better personalization. Well, you got to be aware that over time these things add up. And Ghostery is going to tell you how many of these trackers you have on your page and what the impact from a consumer performance perspective is. And it's very important that when you run this, don't do this from your fast fiber optic connection in your office. Do it from home. Do it do it linked to your cell phone, over tethering internet connection. Make a connection that's representative of what a real consumer will have. And in this case, when we look at Dan van Furstenberg, we see 48 web services, of which 33 of them are slow when you're running over a not wonderful connection. And so what's going on here is that marketing's trying to do a lot of amazing stuff to make the site look better and to know more what's going on. But at the same time, this means that they are really impacting conversion and revenue because it's slowing down the performance of the site. And here's another one from Dell where we found 57 of these trackers. I won't name the company name, Alan, but what was the number one count of these trackers without calling out the company that you saw?
The highest number that we have seen third-party tags on a site was 220. And it was a significant challenge. They were not tracking the performance of these third-party tags, and many of them were causing revenue attrition on their site almost on a daily basis, because keep in mind that these third-party tags will have good days and bad days, and they need to be monitored to make sure that you're not seeing negative revenue impact. And if you do see revenue impact, you don't necessarily need to disable or get rid of the tag. Where it shows up on the page is incredibly important in page performance. So in many cases, if you have got social media, for example, and marketing loves this, right? We got to have Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest on our site. Putting them too early in the page delays the content that helps your users make buying decisions. So in the worst case, you can always move them to later in the page. Tag governance is a very hot topic right now, and it can impact your revenue by 20%, depending on the device and location. So definitely take a look at third-party tags, look at some waterfalls, and move anything that is social media related to later in the page.
That's right. And my guidance on top of that would be, you're going to find what I call cold dead fish. You're going to find tags that still exist where you don't know that you don't use the vendor anymore, you don't use the service anymore. It's just a great thing to go home and kind of cull this stuff. Today you always have to be minimizing these things. And my last thought on this is, as a CMO, this is where I'll occasionally even get calls from board members. Hey, Dan, your website's down. And it's never my website's down. It's that one of these tags is, performing badly, and they were unfortunately loaded in a blocking position. And so it's preventing the rest of the site from working. And it's why you really need to think about, this kind of tag management and not letting it get out of control. Second thing I want you to look at is, I want you to go install an ad blocker on your laptop or on your device, on your PC. And I want you to then go visit your own and play around in your own website with an ad blocker installed. And the number one ad blocker being used in the world is something called AdBlock Plus. That's the one you want to download. And what ad blockers are trying to do is two things. One is they're trying to block ads. And many of you on the call, as e-commerce companies, you'll actually be showing ads on your website to try to monetize your traffic. And in the U.S., the very latest numbers we see are in North America, close to 30% of consumers have installed ad blockers or sitting behind ad blockers. It's around 40% in Europe. It's as high as 80% in parts of Asia, and it's growing at 30% year over year. And so you can open up, you install AdBlock Plus, you can open up a little window called blockable items, and it will show you what the ad blocker is disabling on your site. And in some cases, like Ariat here, it's disabling a whole bunch of personalization and advertising and marketing and analytics pixels, which you can see in scripts on the bottom there. On a different application, this is Wired Magazine, it actually really messes up the look and feel and functionality of the site. And so I want to make sure that most marketers don't know that ad blocker adoption is now that high. And you really need to use these things in your QA and make a decision about, do you, is what is happening as consumers navigate your site, are they seeing what you expect? Is all your personalization working like it should be? Or are these ad blockers really messing with you? Alan, you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a recent study on a couple of media sites, and in some cases there were car companies that were providing referrals to dealerships. In some of those cases, we found that 40% of the ads or third-party content on the page were being blocked. And that created a usability experience that reduced revenue rather significantly for these organizations. So, when you have blank areas on a page, it negatively impacts the buying decision. So you should definitely have eyes on how these ad blockers are impacting user experience on your site.
Great. Okay, Alan, you want to pick things up now?
Absolutely. So we're going to show you a metric that I am fairly sure you have not been paying attention to, but this is a metric that will very clearly demonstrate to the organization how well your brand equity, trust, and security is playing with your customers. And it is directly related to the way they interact with your site when there are obstacles to purchasing. So the concept is called user tenacity. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you what this looks like, but it is a metric that is incredibly important. User tenacity is a love letter to you from your customers. And here's what it looks like. In general, we see when pages are slow, users convert at a lower level, and when pages are fast, they convert higher. But we noticed over the last 2 years that there is an anomaly that occurs fairly consistently with certain types of companies. And if we click, we're going to circle them here. And that is that when the site is fast, users convert high, and then the site gets slow and conversions go down. And then at the tail end, when things are very slow, conversions go up again. This didn't make a lot of sense to us. The first time we noticed this, and if we click to the next slide, was at this particular customer. And this customer is a customer that builds and manufactures parts for diesel trucks. One more click, Dan, please. Thank you. They make parts for diesel trucks that are out of manufacture. So in some cases, these parts, they can only be purchased from this particular retailer. And when we noticed this anomaly, where traffic and conversions were going up at the end, the tail end when things were slow, we reached out to the customer. And what we found out was in most cases, these were users on mobile devices at truck stops around the country in broken trucks. They had a captive audience, in this case, because they were the only ones that sold this exclusive product. So users were coming to the site, and regardless of how long it took to make that purchase, they had to make it because they had to get their trucks running. And then we went through our customers that had similar things in common. We looked at airlines, and we looked at airlines with very strong customer loyalty programs. I happen to be a member of Delta. So when I fly across the country, I am almost always going to buy a ticket on Delta, even if it takes me a while to get that done, because I get a benefit out of it. I get the points, and I'm likely to get upgraded. When we look at sites like Apple that have huge trust with their customers, even though they don't really run promotions, they have a very loyal base. So we see user tenacity there as well. So what makes your users tenacious are, one, exclusive and unique products. Two is promotions. If you run a big sale, you're not only going to see that conversions come up as a whole, but user tenacity will come up as well. People want to take advantage of that unique pricing. Loyalty programs make a huge impact on this. Trust and past positive experiences. So you want to see user tenacity as much as possible. And while it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because you're going to have some slow customers and you're going to see some drop-off, it is going to tell you how effective your marketing and branding programs are in the marketplace. And if you don't see strong user tenacity, it may make sense to sit down with your group and talk about how to create it. This makes a huge difference in long-term revenue.
So Alan, what would happen if, if that particular company, they're gonna, from the story you said, it would sound to me like they need to really work on performance as well. But if I have a slow connection in the middle of a truck stop, the only thing that's gonna keep me there is that unique assortment. Is that really the way I should think about it?
That's absolutely correct. And in this case, users just couldn't click away because they had nowhere else to buy this product. And for those on the phone, and I see a couple of organizations here that have very unique products, you're going to see a lot of user tenacity. For the companies that don't, and you don't see user tenacity, take a look at things that might impact that. And maybe it's creating loyalty programs or creating more trust or better customer service or a personalized experience. But this can make a difference in the lifetime customer value of 20 to 40%, because the users in this truck stop instance were not only buying the part that they need, but they were also buying other items as well. And that boosted revenue for those clients. So not only were the slower users getting higher conversions, but they were spending more money as well.
That's great. I mean, I think the CMO perspective on that is, it's a nice leading, it's an interesting leading indicator, but I never want to piss off my customers by being slow. So, I love it that they're going to be tenacious, but let's have them all have a great experience, in addition. That's the way I think about it. Okay. Go ahead, Alan.
Awesome. So again, user tenacity, it determines whether or not your e-commerce and branding strategy is functioning correctly. And most importantly, differentiating you from your competition. When at the motorcycle helmet example at the beginning, had one of those two first sites had a user loyalty program where I could use points as a discount, or I would get something like free shipping, I likely would have stayed on those sites in order to purchase that product. But neither one of them had any user tenacity for me. So keep in mind that many of the users on your site are not recurrent users. They are people that are popping in, and in many cases, they are doing impulse purchases. Those are the people that you need to target. If you can create tenacity with these individuals, you will have a customer for life.
Okay, so let's talk about a real world thing here, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really exciting story, and it very clearly demonstrates what we're talking about. So Beauty Brands is one of the market leaders in selling beauty supplies and spa experiences. They are a very large site, and they were preparing for a sale that was happening in July that they do every year. They were a Kibo customer, which is an e-commerce platform, and they had recently upgraded to the new version, and performance tanked. Their revenue was down 40% on average due to a 2-second slowdown on their page, which is huge. And you can see what that looks like here. Conversion rates are in yellow and revenue per customer are in green. The day that they deployed both Instart Logic, the digital experience platform, and the suggestions that we had made based upon third-party tags and other pieces of content, the moving average for revenue increased substantially, and so did conversions. So if we click one time, we can see the moving averages for each of these. So revenue, on average, went up significantly, and this is revenue per transaction. It went from essentially $62 to over $70. And conversion rates went from below 0.8%. Initially, they popped up to over 2.9%. And then when they finally settled in, it settled in at 2x what it was before. So this customer, Beauty Brands, now has a significant and long-term improvement on their revenue and their conversion rates based upon a performance change. And you can see that performance change happen on the 17th of January. And the cool thing about performance is, one, it is not subjective. Like everything else that the people on the phone are going through, you look at marketing tools and you want to make sure the aesthetics of the site and what color is a button. Those are all subjective. Performance is not. So you can look at a site and say, hey, if we speed this up, we're going to get $25 million in revenue. And here's exactly how we do it. So it creates a correlation for you, and it makes it very easy to do. Don't ignore the easy fixes, because they're the ones that are going to bring you revenue right away.
Right. And in fact, it's very common for us here at Instart that as major digital properties are going over, they're going through replatforming, so they're deploying a bunch of new functionality that they're worried is going to slow the site down. They'll actually deploy Instart Logic in parallel to that to make sure that they get back to that performance level that's optimal for their clients. That's actually a really common case for us. So now, Alan, you want to talk about a little bit about, we've been trying not to do commercials here. What does Blue Triangle actually do?
Sure. So what we do is we answer a question that e-tailers and e-commerce organizations, or anyone doing business on the web, has been asking for 20 years. I come from a company called Keynote Systems, and if you guys remember Keynote, we were the biggest company in the world that did external measurements of websites, right? We'd measure the site, and we'd publish an index. Hey, Amazon was fastest, and Walmart was second, and anyone who wanted to be faster would come and get more measurements. And we always had the same conversation. It was, Alan, I believe that revenue and performance are linked, so if I fix performance, how much revenue am I going to get? And the largest company in the world doing web performance had no answer. So the founders the technical founders of Keynote figured that out. So we monetize your website. We provide a dashboard for your business folks to look and say, hey, what is the revenue opportunity on my site and what pages are they associated with? Your homepage, speed that up, it's $22 million a year. Speed up your cart page by 18% and you're going to get another 4 million. And not only do we identify where the opportunities are, but we've got tools for the technical organization to provide the remediation. And in many cases, it's we need to move a third-party tag, we need to compress this image, or we need to move a piece of content. that can make a difference of 20% or higher revenue on your site. So think of us as the organization that identifies the opportunity and tells you exactly how to remediate. And then Dan will talk about the actual remediation process.
Yep. So on the Instart Logic side, what we offer is I think of it a little like Google or Facebook. We're a cloud-based platform. So this is software that's running in the fabric of the internet. So you don't have to deploy or install anything within your company. And we sit in between your cloud, web, and mobile application servers and all of those consumers that are trying to work with you on the internet. And what it is an AI-driven platform, and it helps improve the performance, consumer experience, security, and ultimately revenue of your digital initiatives. And so within the platform, we have applications for cloud, web, and mobile application performance. In the cloud cloud and web application space, we would typically see 10 to 30% performance improvements. For native mobile applications, like things you put in the App Store, you can see up to 40% faster performance when it's going through our platform. Image optimization is a big seller for us, and so this is the ability to use artificial intelligence to make images in your applications look better and perform better. The advertising and marketing recovery is a part of the platform that kind of very quietly renders ad blockers ineffective. So if you're interested in turning back on display advertising or other kinds of advertising, or making your marketing pixels and personalization working again in the face of ad blocker adoption, that's certainly something we can help you with. And then we have a whole suite that's for another day around security. We also offer a next generation content delivery network. So really it's a full shop for companies that are looking at making cloud, web, and mobile applications look better, perform better, be more secure, and we help you make more revenue. So with that, we're getting close to the end of today's webcast, and it looks like we have time for 2 questions. Okay, Alan, and why don't I give them both to you, and I'll ask them. I can make you the expert. Okay. So the first one, Alan, is earlier we talked about moving customers from 3.5 or more seconds into the sweet spot, which was for this client, 28% higher conversion. Is 3.5 seconds always the sweet spot for everybody? Does it depend? Does it differ by vertical or by? I think you talked about differs by mobile versus desktop. And is there, can you just talk about that and how that mix works a little bit, and what might drive that number for me, the sweet spot number?
Absolutely. It's a very good question. So about 6 years ago, Gartner and Forrester came out with a report that said the sweet spot, or the perfect load time for a web page, is 2.8 seconds. Now, I don't know how they got to that number, but everyone was shooting for that for a very long time as an industry standard target. As it turns out, every customer of ours that we have done analysis on has a different sensitivity to performance. And I'll give you an example of 2 companies that are not customer of ours, but it will make it's an easy demonstration. So Amazon's performance does not need to be the same as Walmart's performance, and in many cases it doesn't even need to be close. So every customer has a different experience and a different sensitivity, and every business will as well. So all of the data that you're seeing here, and we've talked a little bit about some industry standard averages, but all of this data is specific to your site. And what that means is, although a 28% improvement for one customer might be a 16% improvement for you for the same performance increase. And this is why we recommend that you go down the path of looking at the conversion rate curve for you. You're going to find that your optimal performance may be slower or faster than your competitors. And that means if your optimal load time is 2 seconds and you speed it up to 1 second, you're not going to get any additional benefit, but you're going to pay the cost of that over optimization. So the sweet spot is the sweet spot for you as a customer. We have got some industry averages across all of our travel and leisure companies and across all of our fashion companies, but each of those has a different sensitivity, and it can be markedly different than the competition. So as you implement changes, you need to make sure you're implementing the changes that have the most revenue impact. And that's why you need to look at something that is specific to you.
Great. And then last quick, go ahead. This last quick question, because we're running out of time and I want to be thoughtful, is could you just talk really quickly about, Alan, off the top of your head, the top key performance indicators that Blue Triangle thinks really matters when you guys are working with clients to help them maximize revenue?
Absolutely. So for the folks that have a slightly technical background on the phone, the targets you should be looking at most are DOM interactive, and that is the point in time when your users have an interactive experience on your website. A dialog box has come down, they can click the Buy It Now button. And then finally, the onload event, which is when most of your content has come down. You will be very sensitive to one of those two metrics, or more sensitive in one of them. That's where you need to go. Now, some of the quick fixes are going to be third-party content, making sure those tags load at the appropriate place in the loading process, and looking and scrutinizing when your specific pieces of image content come down to make sure that you're looking at the correct information to change the buying decision. So definitely focus on those things. Your milestones are going to be DOM interactive and onload event.
Very good. Okay. So with that, we have come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank all of you for your great questions and attendance. It's fabulous. Alan, you did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
You got it. And then just everyone, we wish you a great day. And if you're interested, we'd both be happy to help you going forward. Take care, everybody.